I think we can get started. I'm pleased to introduce Christian Sinclair, who has also presented in the course before. And I think you're going to find the presentation this evening very interesting. I know I've learned a lot when Christian has presented about a part of the world that I actually don't know all that much about. So it's a learning experience, I think, for many of us. Christian is the Director of Middle Eastern Studies at SIT Study Abroad in Brattleboro, Vermont. He is responsible for the development and management of educational programs in the Middle East and North Africa that integrate cultural immersion, reciprocal community relations, and rigorous academic field study in a holistic global learning community. Christian Sinclair has extensive experience in education, management, and cross-cultural training experience around the world, and he spent 10 years working and teaching in the Middle East and North Africa before joining World Learning. Much of his time in the Middle East was in Syria, where he worked as an international projects manager and as a language trainer, so those of you who are involved in project management activities will also be interested in his comments. At World Learning, he's taught modern standard Arabic, Syrian colloquial Arabic, and intercultural communication, and I think this evening you'll also learn a little bit about the Arabic language from what I've seen. His particular interests include intercultural communication, issues of identity in the Middle East, language learning, and contemporary Arab literature. Will you please welcome Christian Sinclair?
Thank you, Mark. Is this working? Thanks. Well, thank you for that introduction. This is my second time here at Iowa State presenting in this course, and it's good to be back. As I was finalizing this presentation this afternoon, I remembered something about my time in the Middle East that's related to Iowa. And it's curious that Iowa is probably the best known state in the Arab world. And in colloquial Arabic, the word for yes is Iowa. So at the embassies across the Arab world, when an Arab goes to get a visa, they say, "Oh, you want to go to the United States?" And they say, "Iowa." So they're given a visa to come here. Anyway, that's a little bit of trivia about Arabic in the Middle East. You know, if you mention other states, they might not be as familiar, but if you say Iowa, they know exactly where it is. So tonight, what I want to talk to you about is popular culture and globalization in the Arab world, but mostly it's going to be about looking at what the Arab world is and how it's changing in the face of globalization, and how globalization is really fueling this growth in popular culture, this widespread phenomenon of new media and satellite revolution and internet. Originally, I had intended on talking specifically at the end about the country in the Gulf called the Sultanate of Oman. I was supposed to travel there a couple of weeks ago. That was postponed until 2 weeks from now. So I've scratched that idea, and we're just going to talk generally about the Arab world. So, the outline for this evening, really looking at what is the Arab world, some of the historical forces that have shaped the region, linguistic, religious, and political identities, a quick look at Islam as a very important factor in the Arab world, globalization in the Arab context, popular culture and Arab identity, and then leave some time for your questions. But I don't want to limit your questions to the end of the presentation. If during my talk there's any point where you're confused, you need clarification, just ask, I'll stop. Back in 1993, Halim Barakat, an Arab sociologist, wrote that one of the greatest obstacles to Arab unity is the growing social psychological distance resulting from lack of communication. This was in his book, The Arab World. Back in 93, 14 years ago, there was very little communication from one country to the next. In fact, it was kind of the modus operandi of many Arab states to limit communication to within that one country. Egyptians weren't really talking to Syrians, Tunisians weren't talking to Egyptians, Omanis weren't talking to Bahrainis, etc. It was all very limited. It was an intentional way of keeping the community in place, controlling. This year, Andrew Hammond published a book on popular culture and says the Arab world is politically moving closer together, not drifting apart, and it's popular culture about the only sphere where the ideology was successful that's aiding the process. What he's referring to is the failure of Arab nationalism as a policy in the Middle East. Started in the 50s, Arab nationalism tried to unify the Arab world politically, and it was at its high point in the 50s and the 60s. Syria and Egypt joined together to form one country. They split after a couple of years, and Arab nationalism has pretty much failed, except in Syria. It's still alive and well in Syria. So before I tell you what an Arab is and tell you a little bit about the Arab world, what I want to do is kind of probe the audience. I want to see what you know. What do you think? What are your perceptions of what an Arab is? So with the people next to you, just take a couple minutes, answer these questions. What do you know about Arabs? What do you know about the Arab world? And it can be anything, as written here: food, religion, culture, fashion, language, etc. Where are you getting this information? And how accurate do you think it is? So just take a few minutes, talk, and we'll see what you say.
Michelle might potentially have someone at home who would want to respond to it. She raises her hand.
Okay. Okay, let's hear some of your ideas, some of your thoughts. Who's an Arab? What's an Arab?
I'll begin with where I got this information. 2 years back, I happened to visit Dubai, and I found that most of the Arabs have an extravagant way of living their life. They have this, there's no dearth of money spending, and, in terms of the kind of malls that I saw there, everything was really lavish and extravagant.
Okay. All I'm doing is listening now. I'm not going to say anything about whether I agree with your assumptions or not.
In my opinion, Arabs are those that are around the Arab Peninsula, though some people will look at people from Morocco and think that they're Arabs, or from Turkey who will think they were Arabs. But the Turks and the Moroccans don't consider themselves Arabs. I lived in Turkey for 2 years, and I'm married to a Moroccan.
We talked about how Islam's probably the predominant religion in the Arab world, and how the 5 pillars of faith kind of make up kind of how they live their lives in a large part of a way, and also that there's a spectrum of fundamentalist religion aspects in there to maybe more modern types of Islam in the world, that part of the world.
Other ideas? Okay. Here's one definition from the Arab League. A person whose language is Arabic, who lives in an Arabic-speaking country, and who is in sympathy with the aspirations of the Arabic-speaking peoples. In other words, if you feel like an Arab, if you speak Arabic, if you live in an Arab country, and you feel like an Arab, then you're an Arab. All right? And there are a lot of Arab countries where the inhabitants don't necessarily see themselves as Arabs. Egyptians tend to think of themselves as Egyptians, and they see the Arabs who live in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and those countries as the Arabs. In fact, many years ago, my wife is Egyptian, and we were in Cairo at a family gathering, and I had grown a goatee. And my wife's cousin looked at me and said, "You look like a dirty Arab," meaning someone from the Gulf, because she, as an Egyptian, didn't think of herself as Arab. So she spoke Arabic, she lived in an Arabic-speaking country, but was not sympathetic with the aspirations. So by this definition, she wouldn't have been. The Lebanese or others, they often think of themselves as the ancestors of the Phoenicians. So it really depends on where you are, what the political context is, and who the people are that they're interacting with, whether or not they say that they feel like they're an Arab. It changes constantly. Now, I asked you, when you were thinking about what is an Arab, who is an Arab, where you get the information from, because oftentimes we get our information about the Middle East, about the Arab world, from political cartoons, from the media, and this is often how they're portrayed. They're portrayed as angry, ugly, oppressed people who hate the United States. Right? This is what we see. This is what you see when you go there. All right, there are people who are from all walks of life. Some do wear the traditional hijab and burqa. Others, just regular business suits. You've got Christians, you've got Muslims. This picture here in the center is Oman. They have a very particular style of dress. Top left, family in Jordan. All right, look like any other family. So a few demographics. A little more than 300 million Arabs. 90% are Muslim, as someone up here said. They talked about Islam as it relates to being an Arab. But not all of them are Muslim. 90% are, and that's divided up into the 3 largest groups, the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Ibadis. Sunni is the predominant sect within Islam. The only Arab country that has a majority of Shia is Iraq. The country with a majority Ibadi is Oman. The others are all Sunni. And of course, within those 3 sects, there are different subsects. The others, they're Christians and Jews, Greek Orthodox, Catholic. The Jews are known as Mizrahim, those Jews who come from Arab countries. 23 countries. The largest is Egypt, population of about 78 million right now. Bahrain, a small island country in the Gulf, 700,000, which is approximately the same size as Vermont. Overall literacy rate is the lowest of any region in the world, 66%. However, when you look at the literacy rate amongst the youth, 15 to 24, it's much higher. And this is increasingly going up and up. And a lot of it is due to globalization, more availability and access to information. What brings this rate down is there are certain countries, Yemen and Sudan, and parts of Morocco and Algeria, where literacy rate is hovering just below 50%. So that brings it overall down. Kuwait and Lebanon have some of the highest literacy rates in the mid-90s. So, in the Arab world, there are really three main identities. And we're going to look at those. One we talked about a little bit, Islam. It's more of a global identity. The other one, the Middle East, is a geographical marker thrust upon the region by the West. And then the last is the ethnicity, Arab. And these circles are drawn proportionately. So if you look at this larger green circle, Islam, you'll see that the Arabs within that circle make up maybe a quarter of it. It's actually about 22% of the Muslim world is Arab. And on this side, you see, there's just a little bit of the Arab world that's on the other side of that circle. So there's about 90% Muslim, 10% who aren't. Most of them do live in the Middle East, this blue circle, but there are quite a few who don't. And this blue circle is mutable. It depends on where you are. Because the definition of the Middle East changes. Some people include North Africa, others don't. Some people include Afghanistan and Pakistan, others don't. I'm using here more traditional definition of the Middle East, which is Turkey to the north, Egypt to the west, Iran to the east, and Yemen to the south. So, if you fill in the blanks, this is kind of what you get. Tonight we're talking about those in this red circle. So I'm showing you this so you can get an idea of who's within that group and who's not. So anyone outside of that red circle is not part of this discussion tonight. Okay? So, the Pakistanis, the Indonesians, the Kenyans, many of them are Muslim, but they're not Arab. All right? The Kurds, the Turks, the Persians, the Circassians, they live in the Middle East. Most of them are not Arab. In fact, with the Persians, the worst thing you can say to them is call them an Arab. The North Africans, over here, the Tunisians, Libyans, Algerians, Moroccans, those who are Arab live outside the Middle East. They live in North Africa. But many Moroccans and Algerians are not Arab. They're Berbers, or as they call themselves, Amazighin. Others who are Arabs but are not Muslim, the Arab Christians, the Arab Jews, and then the Arab Christian diaspora. Those Christian Arabs who live outside of the region. They've resettled in the United States, Canada, Europe, wherever. So this is really what we're focusing on this evening, this particular circle. Any questions about this so far? No, it's clear? What we're trying to look at is, you've got this very disparate group of people spread across 23 countries, from the Atlantic Ocean, Morocco, all the way across to the UAE on the Persian Gulf. Thousands and thousands of miles away. What's happening now as a group vis-a-vis their identity because of globalization and popular culture. How are these people now unifying and coming together as one because of the forces of globalization? All right, before, if you remember, the first quote I gave you from Barakat said that the lack of unity was due to the lack of communication. It's because these people weren't communicating. Now we see they are crossing boundaries, political, religious, geographic, and they're becoming really one group. More so than ever before. More so when it was an intentional policy of the region to try to bring them together. What's happening now wasn't intentional. It has happened because of increased communication throughout the region. So this is another way of looking at that. This is a map of the Arab world. The map is of Muslim regions. The green is an area where there's a majority of Muslim. The red boundary is Arab. And the traditional definition of the Middle East would be over on this side, on the right side there, from Egypt across to Iran, up to Turkey, and down. You'll notice up in Syria and Iraq, the red line kind of slices through the northeast part of the country. On the other side of that red line is what they call Kurdistan. So that's the area where most of the Kurds live. The dark green is majority Shia. Iraq, as I said, is the only Arab country with a majority Shia. You'll see no other countries where the majority of the population is dark green. These areas of the Arab world can be divided into really three major groupings. In the west, we call the Maghreb, from Morocco to Libya, this one area. The Mashriq, the central part, and then the Gulf. Vastly different regions. The areas here were occupied by the French more than 150 years in the case of Algeria. Most Tunisians, Algerians, Moroccans speak French as a first language, if not a second language. Now there's a resurgence of Berber or Amazigh in Morocco. 40 to 50% of the population is actually Berber. Egypt, and it was a unique country in its own right. They think of themselves as Egyptians. They are the descendants of the pharaohs, the kings of the Middle East. And in a lot of other countries, Egypt is resented because Egypt tries to push its culture, its ideas, its ideologies onto the rest of the region. It's almost like a mini globalization process. Egypt is trying to unify the rest of the region with its culture. And then the Gulf area was pretty much desert with nothing there 50, 70 years ago. Culture there, they say, is like genetically modified food. It's something that was invented, something that is tinkered with, something that is built. Whereas there's thousands of years of culture and urban civilization, Damascus, Baghdad, Cairo. Here, you go here. One year I was in Abu Dhabi, staying at a hotel. I went back to find the hotel. 2 years later, it was gone. There was something else in its place. Things change very quickly. Someone up here talked about very modern, very lavish. They spend billions of dollars creating culture. A little bit about identity. Excuse me, let me take a sip of water. I told you that this talk was really going to look at how the forces of globalization and popular culture have affected identity So what is it? This particular definition is one that I like. Social identity is that part of an individual's self-concept which derives from knowledge of membership in a social group together with the value and emotional significance attached to that membership. So you could be part of a certain group, but your identity depends on how you feel about being part of that group. How do you associate yourself with being a part of that group? Some pieces of identity you can't change. If Arabic is your native tongue, there's nothing you can do about that. If you were born in Egypt, that's your mother country. All right? Now you might not like that, so your relationship, the value that you attach to that membership, is very low. So you might not place importance on that. Sometimes these identities clash. Sometimes they work in harmony. So how do people look at themselves in the region? Well, we said one of the biggest overarching identities is religion. Islam now has a tendency really to define a lot of what people do in the Arab world. It's taken a new place in the identity of a lot of Arabs, and a lot of it has to do with what's happening in the West, how the West is interacting with the Arab world. If you imagine one of your identities, one that you value, one that you hold a strong attachment to, and someone is threatening that identity, what's going to happen? You're probably going to try to strengthen that identity. You're going to bring it out more. All right? So a lot of the resurgence of Islam in the Arab world is because of what they see as a perceived threat or actual threat from the West. All right? So you see more women are veiling, more men are growing beards, more people are reverting to more traditional Arab, Muslim-style clothing that you didn't see before. There are exceptions. Lebanon, where you walk into a bar or a restaurant in Lebanon and you might as well be in Paris. It's a completely different kind of place. So that really now has taken over the mindset for a lot of Arabs. Those who weren't religious before, who didn't necessarily identify with being Muslim, now when asked, how would you identify yourself? First thing they'll say is, I'm a Muslim. The next set is different ethnicities. So we talked about Arab before. And the next line with the flags, national identity. Syrian, Iraqi, Saudi, Libyan, etc. A lot of Arabs don't necessarily identify with their state. These are pretty much artificial nations that have been created by the West. Many governments are trying to encourage this idea of national identity. A recent survey in the UAE looking at textbooks now compared to 15 years ago, notice that a lot of the words in the text were they added Emirati to fortify this idea of national identity, because they were afraid that they were losing it to other identities. They want the locals to identify as Emiratis. Or the other extreme is Syria. As I said before, it's the last bastion of Pan-Arabism, Ba'athist ideology. In Syria, you won't find anything really that talks about the citizens being Syrians. Even in the Syrian constitution, it talks about the inhabitants, the citizens, as being citizens of the larger Arab world. In textbooks, it doesn't say anything about being Syrians. You're not Syrians, you're Arabs, because they're all part of this larger, greater Syria or pan-Arab nation. So there are a lot of extremes here, very different. And then in some places, particularly in the Gulf, you've got people who identify more with certain families, certain tribes. In Oman, for example, there are about 3 or 4 tribes that rule the country. And if you're from a certain tribe, that gives you certain rights, certain privileges. And in that society, the first thing is when you introduce yourself as someone from that particular tribe. Little history. Back in Saudi Arabia, before it was Saudi Arabia, in the Arab Gulf here, the Arab conquest started in 622, and this is what happened in 100 years. The expansion of the Arab conquests across North Africa into Spain and up into present-day Turkey and over through Iran and eastward. And you can see in today's map that what happened in those 100 years has pretty much remained the Arab world today. All right, so all across North Africa and into Spain, where, how many of you know Spanish or study Spanish? There are about 5,000 words in Spanish that are derived from Arabic because of their 800-year presence in Spain. So, recalling the definition of from the Arab League, someone who is an Arab is someone who speaks Arabic. Well, what is Arabic? Okay, it's a language, yes, but it's a very complex system. Typically, we look at Arabic and think of it as a language divided into 3 types. There's the classical Arabic, which is the Arabic that was used in the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Set in stone pretty much back from the 7th century, hasn't changed. It's something that is used throughout the Muslim world, whether you're in Pakistan or New Mexico. If you're a Muslim and if you're studying the Quran, it's in Arabic, it's in this form of Arabic. Modern Standard Arabic is today's version of classical. It's the diluted version of the Quranic Arabic, lost all of its bells and whistles and whatnot, used for formal lectures. If I were giving this lecture today in Jordan, I would be using Modern Standard Arabic. It's used in the press, it's used on TV. It's not spoken in everyday life. It's not something that you're born into. It's not something that you learn at home with your parents. What you learn is a dialect. And when you go to school, when you start first grade, you start learning Modern Standard Arabic, just like you would start learning French or another foreign language. So this leads to a lot of confusion across the Arab world because not many people are completely fluent in Modern Standard Arabic. So if you're from a rural area of Morocco, it's very hard to understand someone from Kuwait unless you're speaking in this artificial, formal language. And not everyone can speak it. My father-in-law, who's Egyptian, native Arabic speaker, has to use French when he goes to Morocco. They understand what he says because of the Egyptian cinema and its wide dissemination across the Arab world, but he has no idea what the Moroccans are saying when they speak Arabic back to him. It's very, very different. In particular, between East and West. The North African countries versus the countries in the Mashriq and the Gulf. And this difference between dialect and standard, the Modern Standard and the dialect, is called diglossia, where there are 2 forms of the language. Now, there's a big debate about the 2 languages. the dialects versus the modern standard Arabic. When the British and the French were in the region, occupying various countries, what they tried to do was eliminate the use of modern standard Arabic, because it was the one thing that they saw as something that pulled the Arab world together, something that gave it strength. It was key to their existence as Arabs, and so they tried to wipe it out. So the French made it illegal to teach modern standard Arabic in schools. So they introduced French. So for decades, which is why today so many of them speak French, they tried to erase that. In the Mashriq area, in Egypt and other places, the British tried to get rid of modern standard Arabic for the same reason. They wanted them to use the Latin script instead of the Arabic script when writing. They wanted them to use the dialects. So today, if you go to the Middle East, if you go to the Arab world, and you try to speak in a dialect or convince them that the dialect is a language worthy of study, they get very suspicious. They immediately start thinking of Western imperialism and occupation, because they see these dialects as a means to divide them up and separate them. What's interesting is that the Islamists have the same idea. They say that we need to keep Arabic, modern standard Arabic, and not use dialects, because they see Arabic as the word of God from the Quran. So very different reasons, the same idea. They say we need to keep modern standard Arabic to unify, well, they say the Muslim world. The Arabists, Pan-Arabists say for Pan-Arabism, to keep the Arabs together. Either way, you've got two very powerful forces trying to keep modern standard Arabic alive. In fact, just last year, Syria banned the teaching of Syrian dialect in the country for these very reasons. It was interesting because when I lived there, a lot of people went to Syria as a place where they could learn Arabic very quickly because of the lack of foreign influence and the ease with which you could practice the Arabic. I'm talking about the dialect. So you could go out in the streets and just go to any cafe, go to any restaurant, and talk to people in Arabic and pick it up very quickly. Well, Syrians started, I think a lot of it was retaliation for what they see as the West interfering in their business in the Middle East. They banned it. So now you cannot go to Syria and learn the Syrian dialect. If you look at it on a continuum, over here the Quranic Arabic and the modern standard Arabic, like I said, they're not spoken natively by anyone. What's this? Okay, thank you. Not spoken natively by anyone. They're learned. Most people exist in this middle area, the educated colloquial, so that they speak in a colloquial, but when they want to talk about something more formal, when they're talking about literature, when they're talking about some lecture that they just saw, they will draw on words from modern standard Arabic to supplement their speech. If you're talking about last night's football match, you're probably going to be more over in this area. But you move back and forth depending on what you're talking about. What's happening now, because of the internet, because of the satellite revolution, people in Yemen are hearing how the Lebanese speak. The Lebanese are listening to the Libyans are listening to the Syrians are listening to the Kuwaitis are listening to the Algerians, and they're starting to pick up on each other's dialects. And so the whole continuum is shifting more to the left. So this now is shifting more towards a standardized form, not of modern standard Arabic, but rather of an educated colloquial. That's becoming more standardized. And this is because of of communication. Right? It's communication that is uniting them in this arena. So a little bit about Islam. Some of the beliefs, some of the major concepts in Islam: belief in God, belief in the angels, belief in God's revealed books, belief in the prophets and messengers of God, belief in the Day of Judgment, and belief in Al-Qadr, which is predestination. And then the 5 pillars of Islam that someone mentioned: testimony of faith, which is saying that I believe that there is a God, one God. Prayer, which is 5 times a day. Zakat is giving money to the poor. Fasting during Ramadan, which is happening right now, the holy month of Ramadan. And the Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca. Where did it come from? In the year 610, Muhammad actually received the first revelations of the Quran from Gabriel the angel, memorized it, recited it over a long period from up until 622. Okay, so it was over a long period where he received this information from God, and it was put down in the book, the Quran, for many years after that. So, if Arabic is what unifies the Arab world, it's the Quran that unifies the Muslim world. Written in Arabic, but because, as I said before, it's the word of God, it can't be touched. So if you say that one of the dialects is a language, what you're saying is then that you're changing the word of God. And so you can't have that. So that's the relationship between Arabic and the Quran. So a little bit about globalization. A lot of fear about how it's changing the Middle East, how it's changing the Arab world. One second. So the fear is that globalization is just a modern way of occupying and taking over the area again, as has been done in the past, all throughout history. There's an objection to Western-style materialism. This goes against the grain of Islam and some of the beliefs in Islam. However, at the same time, there's an absolute fascination with the West. If you don't have the latest cell phone or computer, you're not cool, right? You go to any cafe, which in many countries is a Starbucks or a Caribou, you're going to see everybody sitting there with their Bluetooth pieces, their telephones, and some countries have banned some of this technology because they're afraid of communication. Arab governments are absolutely paranoid about what is being communicated back and forth because they don't have the control that they used to have. In some places it's fear of what's being communicated because of security purposes. In some places like Saudi Arabia, it's a fear of morality. Right? What are these young kids doing? What kind of messages are they sending back and forth to each other with those telephones? So in some places it took a long time before they actually allowed this kind of technology in. And they're still trying to figure out ways to control it. This is just continuing from, back when I lived in Syria, fax machines were illegal for the longest time. You weren't allowed to send a fax because they had no idea what these fax machines were. What kind of messages were you sending back and forth? When they finally allowed them, they had one in the post office. You had to go to the post office to send a fax. You had to take 2 copies. One that you faxed and got back, one that they kept and stamped and wrote your ID number on and filed it away. And they would have somebody go back and look at it to make sure you weren't sending any coded messages. So again, it's this fascination with the West in a lot of places, with technology, with television shows. They don't take our TV shows and show them there. They copy them. So they have an Arab version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Arab Idol they've got. So on one hand, we don't want this because we're afraid of how it's going to change who we are as Arabs. But on the other hand, this is what there is. This is what we need. Let's do it. Now, the interaction amongst Arab countries is also very interesting. You've got Egypt that has been really the center of popular culture throughout the history of the Arab world. It's where cinema and music is developed, it's written and disseminated to other places. And this is because other countries really didn't have the means to do that. Well, now they do, and Egypt doesn't really like the fact that now it has competition. So Lebanon, the UAE, Qatar are places now where they've got some major media centers and are in competition with a lot of what Egypt's doing. Foreign and local relationships. This is another globalization fear. You have foreign NGOs, for example, who are now coming in and working with local NGOs. Well, before, that didn't happen. You had to get a permit to work through the government, and then through the government work with one of the local organizations. Now a lot of what's happening is direct contact. Again, it's this fear of what kind of information is being passed back and forth. A lot of these forces, the orange is the Middle East, the red line again is the Arab world. You've got from the US coming in from Europe, a lot of it is political pressure. From Asia, a lot of it is economic. This area over here, the Gulf, because of its wealth, because of its oil, a lot of times doesn't feel the need to ally itself with the whole idea of Pan-Arabism that particularly this region feels. So Oman, for example, has recently signed a free trade agreement with the United States, following some other countries in the Persian Gulf. Oman trades with India, with China, with the coast of Africa here, rather than looking at its Arab brothers, much to the chagrin of a lot of these countries here. What Syria and others try to insist on is that unless we can all do it together, we shouldn't be doing it, which is another reason that there's a roadblock here with Syria and peace agreements. Right? Syria is saying that it's all or nothing. So Egypt signed a peace treaty with Israel. Jordan signed a peace treaty with Israel. Syria, very angry about that because they see themselves as just one unit. So a little bit about popular culture. Some quick definitions: the culture of the masses. It's common culture, the opposite of high culture. High culture being opera, art galleries and whatnot. Culture of the masses. The low culture would be soap operas, newspapers, magazines, etc. Tends to divide societies along class lines. Music, TV, film, sport, etc. And it changes constantly and occurs uniquely in place and time. What is popular culture today in the Arab world is very different than what it was in the 50s. It's very different than what it might be in 2 years from now. So with the new media, the authorities, the government's ability to suppress or as they like to say, to guide the printed or spoken word has become inherently vitiated by social and technological developments. The ability of the authorities to censor and repress or to project an uncontested central message defining political and religious issues for large numbers of people has been eroded. What governments want is for you to see one message and one message only. This is what we are. This is who we are. You have a question?
Yeah, when you talk about the popular culture, it's different now than it was, say, 50 years ago, and it's different than it's going to be in 20 years. Is their popular culture kind of reflecting what ours is in the West? Or how,
I'm sorry, is it reflecting what?
does their popular culture kind of come from what our popular culture is here in the West? Or how is their...
The question is, does their popular culture come from the West? It's influenced by the West, but not necessarily solely, there's no direct relationship, it's not exclusive. But a lot of it does come from that. And I think a lot of the technology that's being used there now is directly imported, which actually is a vehicle for a lot of this communication. So before, when you had a film in Egypt, it didn't get a lot of press elsewhere in the Arab world. Now, whether it's a film or a concert or a demonstration on the street, it's up there instantly. Just like here with YouTube, they've got the same things there. These videos are being flashed up on screens instantaneously all around the Arab world, and the Arab governments, many of them have special units trying to figure out how to stop this. But everyone, has people who can get around it using these workarounds. So you've got, can I get online here? Does that work, Mark? If I click on this link, will it go on? Paul? It will? I just want to quick show you a sampling of some blogs. So we're waiting for that. You've heard of Al Jazeera, television network, news network, based in Doha, in Qatar. Al Jazeera is fairly new and has really, as a forefront of this news revolution. So anyway, this is Toot. Toot in Arabic means berry. I don't know why this name, but just to show you how many different blogs are out there. A lot of bloggers are writing in English because they reach a wider audience, but many are in Arabic. But if you're interested in learning about really what's happening on the ground now, some of the real current events, what young people are thinking about, who they are, what's happening, their views of the West, their views of Islam, their views about other Arab countries, go to this website and read some of these blogs. They're absolutely fascinating. This one guy, Saudi Jeans, had always blogged anonymously, and recently added his photo and his name just to see what would happen. And nothing happened. But there are a lot of people who have been arrested, jailed for lengthy periods of time because they insulted the government or insulted Islam, or a famous case in Egypt where they discovered a gay blog. A group of homosexuals were arrested there. But we're seeing a little bit more tolerance for some of these writings, but it really depends on where you are. And a lot of these young people doing the blogging are putting themselves in danger because of what they write. But there are, and this is just one sampling of the different blogs that are out there. So I encourage you to have a look. itoot.net, just to see what's there. So, Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera doesn't censor itself at all. It brings on people who give their opinions on politics, on marriage, on religion, on inter-Arab relations, between Arab relations with the West. They've invited Israelis on, they've invited Americans on. They talk about things that typically in the past you weren't supposed to talk about. The U.S. has bombed their headquarters in different countries. The Jordanians have arrested Al Jazeera reporters. Other countries have shut down Al Jazeera offices. Some say Al Jazeera is a puppet of the West. Some say they're secret Mossad agents. Some say that they're Mukhabarat, which is the secret police of the Arab countries. So there are all kinds of theories out there about who these people are and what they're doing. What's happening is the people who are seeing this are trying to wrap their heads around the fact that now this is really a free press in the Middle East. And they're hearing unfiltered, uncensored news that they've never heard before. Al Arabiya is another news station, probably the biggest Al Jazeera competitor. Syria Comment is a U.S. blog by a guy in Oklahoma, Josh Landis. I put that up there only because also what's happening now is that people in the Middle East, in the Arab world, have access to blogs elsewhere. So here's a guy who spent a lot of time living in Syria, married a Syrian, and writes about what he sees as current events and politics in Syria. You know, were the Syrians really behind the assassination of the former prime minister in Lebanon? Were the Syrians behind this? Did they do that? You know, he gets calls from the Syrian embassy in Washington saying, "What are you doing? Why are you putting that up there?" All right? But so it works within the region and then externally. And the big thing now is trying to reconcile plurality and unity. All right? These are very different peoples, but they're coming together as one. All right? They've got a common language, modern Standard Arabic. They've got a common culture. They've got the geography. They've got the shared history. But there's also a very fragmented society because of imperialism, sectarianism, tribalism, different ethnic solidarities from different groups, localisms and regionalisms. You've got the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Emirates, those Gulf countries, working together to the exclusion of others. You've got the Maghreb Union working together, pretty much to the exclusion of the rest of the Arab world. So, while there is now more of a joining together, there's still a lot of division, a lot of fragmentation. So in summary, the forces of globalization, both internal and external, are fueling popular culture's powers of Arab unity, strengthening solidarity, and renewing Arab identity. So that's all I have to say, and I'll open the floor now to your questions. I think that was about an hour.
I had a question regarding the education. You said that there are many English blogs in the Arab world. So do most Arabs know English?
I can't hear you.
Do most Arabs know English, or do they learn it in school?
A lot of them know English. The more educated ones now use English as a second language. Let me just give you a couple statistics here. In 2002, one of the most recent Arab development reports said that only 0.5% of the Arab world were actually internet users. So it's a very small percentage. When you think of the Arab world as being 5% of the global population, only 0.5% are actually using the internet. And regionally, it ranks last amongst all other regions. Let's see. So anyway, so those few that are using it have the access, they have the money. Usually they're well-educated or more educated than others, so they're going to know English. And many of them are blogging from other countries. They're Arabs who are living in the U.S. or Canada or Australia, might even be first, second generation, and now English is their first language.
I have a couple questions. First, would you be able to show on the map the origin of the Arab people, where they first came from?
Mm-hmm. Somewhere in this area, right? What is now present-day Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thank you. And then also, is there a special significance for the colors of their flags? Because it seems, from what I can tell, mainly they use red and green.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Special significance for what?
Of the colors of their flags, it seems like most Arab countries have the same colors in their flags.
Yeah, and I intentionally used these colors in the title to match the colors of the flags. These are colors of the Arab nation. So you'll see that, in this particular graphic, the flags are in the shape of the country, but it's the same colors repeated over and over again. And one of the most recent uproars about flags was after the occupation of Iraq, the U.S. had a contest to see who could come up with a new flag for Iraq. And it didn't have any of these colors. It was white with a little bit of blue and some wavy gold lines. And they said, the Iraqis said, and other Arabs said, it looks like an Israeli flag. No, we will not accept this. But because it didn't have these colors, and also because it looked a little bit like another flag, they rejected it. But yeah. One other thing about internet usage, going back to the question over here about blogging, because some of these governments are so paranoid about communication, they're trying to suppress what's happening in cyberspace, and what they're doing is creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the more they suppress it, the more underground the communication goes, and actually the larger it gets. So now what we're seeing is this cyber unity in the Arab world, and it's growing proportionally to the amount of pressure the governments are putting on to stop it.
You mentioned earlier that the Arab world feels like it's slightly under attack from the Western world. I was wondering if you agree with that statement, and if you do feel that it's not, that the Western world isn't attacking them, is there any way we could, what can we do to convince them that we just want to learn and that we're not trying to take over?
In fact, I think we are attacking them. We have attacked them. Not we specifically, the United States, but over the course of history, that area has been attacked and occupied by civilizations and groups of people from all over the world. So I think what they're seeing now is it's another attempt to take over the region. This time it's oil related. I strongly believe that if the Arab world had a global market in bananas, we wouldn't be attacking them. But because of the oil, we're there. And what can we do to convince them that we're not? Stop. I mean, I think we really need to try to understand each other. And I think you coming to this talk tonight is a start. And hopefully, with more open dialogue online, more students studying abroad, right now, a lot of the Arabs who are coming here to study abroad have gone elsewhere. They're going to Australia and New Zealand because they don't get harassed at the airports. The visas are easier to get. hopefully within the next few years, things might change. We might be able to get people back here, more educational exchange. I mean, but it's going to take decades, literally, I think, to repair some of the damage done over the past 7-8 years in their perceptions of what's happening.
I was wondering, what area of globalization do you think is taking the most root there, whether it's communications? Sorry, you couldn't hear me. I was asking what area of globalization is taking the most root there, whether it's consumer goods or communication or what aspect?
Well, it depends a lot on what part of the region you're in. I think in the Gulf, it's a lot of the consumerism. It's the just spending as much money as possible. In some of the poorer countries, it's more the media, films, soap operas, that kind of popular culture.
A lot of the Gulf states' economies are largely based on oil, which obviously isn't going to hold out forever. And what sort of future do you see for them after the oil gives out?
Yeah, good question. These are rentier states where they're pretty much existing on revenues from oil. What you're seeing now in these Gulf countries that depend on oil revenues is a diversification of the economy. What they're trying to do is draw more revenue from tourism. They're building big resorts, trying to attract foreigners in, buying up land for development. The United Arab Emirates has this crazy island of it's shaped like a palm tree, and you can buy a piece of the island for I don't know how many millions of dollars. They're also diversifying in other energy sectors, liquid gas and others. But some countries are a little ahead of others, and when the oil does run out, whenever that might be, I think you'll see that some countries, some of the economies will probably collapse. Some are, like I said, further ahead, but nobody really knows when that's going to happen. So.
You've spent a lot of time in the Arab world, so I was wondering, what does your presence, what effect does your presence have on them? Have you sensed the fear or something of globalization that you have? I mean, you have an Egyptian wife, for example. So, if you're introduced to someone, I mean, do you sense an effect in them that is different?
I think. What happens when I'm in the Middle East, because I've spent so much time there, because I speak Arabic, I'm pretty well accepted as part of the community. When I first got there, when I didn't speak Arabic, it was also a very different time. Syria was not yet part of the axis of evil. They were actually on our side. Sending troops to the Gulf when Saddam first invaded Kuwait. So it was a very different time. There wasn't that suspicion that there is now of why people are there. However, I remember one time our organization was sponsoring a film festival in Damascus, and one of the staff at the U.S. Information Service, USIS, which no longer exists now, brought all of us together who were going to be presenting the films in Arabic. And he said that what we needed to do was, if we spoke Arabic well, to try to change our accent so that it didn't sound like we knew Arabic well. Because if the audience heard a foreigner speaking flawless Arabic, they would zone in on that and they would get very suspicious about why a foreigner spoke really good Arabic. And they would forget about the film festival. So we were told, this is by an American, that we had to speak really bad Arabic to introduce the films. That never happened because the Syrians ended up canceling the film festival anyway. But anyway. Question here? Or up there?
we talked about a lot of things. We talked about a lot of things. I just wanted to know, how has globalization affected the state of women in the Arab countries? Because we still see a lot of women who are studying here in the United States wearing their hijabs, but we don't see a lot of men who still wear their goatees or whatever. So how has globalization really affected the state of women in the rigid Arabian countries?
That's a good question, and it's not one that I have a real in-depth answer to. I can give you some examples where in countries where women's rights are more advanced than others. For example, in Tunisia, it usually used as an example of women's freedoms. I think it's back in 56 or 57 when women were given the right to vote. Women are now freely elected to parliament. They can get divorced without getting permission. So, that's not a direct effect of globalization, but I think what's happening now because of globalization, because of increased communication, is that you see examples like Tunisia and to some extent Oman. Other countries are seeing what's happening, and then you see women in other Arab countries demanding their rights as well. Before 2003, Iraq actually was one country where women were probably more educated there than in any other Arab country. With Oman, a very, very conservative society, women are still covered, but Oman has sent the very first Arab woman ambassador to the United States. She's now in Washington, and has done other things in promoting women up to cabinet-level positions, whereas other Arab countries are still loath to do that. And I think they're setting examples for other countries.
I'm just curious, kind of a follow-up to the previous question. How accepting are Arab people of a foreigner that speaks Arabic? I know in some countries they're like, you're not one of us, don't speak our language. How do the Arabic people respond to that?
Well, I think it's like a lot of countries where if you speak the language, they're very welcoming. And, if you're able to communicate with someone, it gives you a real window into their culture. And anyone who really attempts to learn the local language is warmly welcomed. At least that's my experience. However, let me put a caveat on that. Because of the different dialects, if you learn one dialect in one country and you go to another country, and that particular country doesn't like the country where you've been, and you speak that dialect, then they might not be so friendly. The dialect that I speak is pure Damascene Arabic. And I was with a Jordanian. She was a student on our campus in Vermont, and started speaking to her in Arabic, and she said, no. She said, we need to speak in English. I said, why? She said, I hate the Syrians, and I can't stand talking to you when you sound like a Syrian. So it really depends on how you speak. Anyway.
This is part of Middle East, the hatred that they have
towards I can't hear you.
The hatred part of Middle East has towards the West, is it because of the past or is it because of the current events? And how much of it is because of the past?
You're going to have to repeat that. The hatred?
The hatred that the part of the Middle East has towards the West. Is it because of the past, like the land was conquered by certain Western nations, or is it because of the current events that are happening?
Well, I think it's they don't see it. There's just one continuous stream of what they see as atrocities and disasters that have befallen them. So it's just one thing after another. So what's happening now is really just more of the same. So I think there was a period in the 90s when there was more optimism, more hope, sort of rapprochement between the two. I think that's been wiped out now. But I think it ebbs and flows, but it's seemingly there under the surface in many places all the time.
If there are no other questions, Christian would like to thank you very much for an informative
Thank you.
evening. And I'm
Appreciate
sure
it.
if you have questions.
Thanks.
If questions, come on. Popular culture.